Welcome, everyone, to Session 2 of the Gender Equity Learning and Innovation Network, putting women who farm at the center. This is the second in a series, a one-year series, of the GenLin, which is funded by SWISSCO and Ecom and supported by work of various origin teams from Ecom and other partners over the past several years. We want to start with a bit of strategic framing. Why are we here and what the GenLin is all about? We know that there are many, many challenges that we're facing in both the coffee and cocoa sectors, and also many opportunities. There are compounding pressures from regulation and certification requirements, sustainability ambition, and shifting markets. What we're looking to underscore is that the gender gap is not a separate issue. It is an inherent supply chain risk, and it's also an opportunity to improve the system performance for both coffee and cocoa. We know that when women are excluded, inefficiencies are created, and that there are human rights risks that come about, and many, many missed opportunities. If we look out to see where women are playing roles in the supply chain, they're incredibly connected and they share experiences in throughout these systems. And so the opportunity we have here is to really close the gap, really shift how we look at gender, not as a sideline issue, but something that is a key critical opportunity. The Gender Equity Learning and Innovation Network is bringing together practitioners like all of you, sustainability teams, and anyone who is facilitating the work of practitioners on the ground. The idea is that through exchange and applied learning, that innovations and opportunities become more practical and more real. What our belief is, and I think that many of you that are here would agree, is that more inclusion leads to better functioning supply chains and overall better lives for coffee and cocoa farming communities and families. We want to take a moment to hear who's in the room and move forward with that understanding of who's here. The platform itself is for practitioners and anyone who supports them. We want to take a moment to thank those organizations and individuals who are making this work possible. First and foremost is our partner Ecom, which is our lead implementation and funding partner. We've been working with the Ecom Origin Sustainability teams over the past number of years, and more intensively in this project that is funded by the Swiss Sustainable Cacao Platform. We, as Equal Origins, are your network host and anchor of the program, and we're doing this in partnership also with the International Cocoa Initiative and other allies, including you. And specifically, we want to underscore the critical support of SWISSCO and Ecom, without whom this would be impossible. All of this work is underpinned by the Gender Equity Index. And for those of you that are unaware of the GEI, it is a free diagnostic tool that was specifically built for coffee and cocoa supply chains. It assesses the organization's capacity for gender responsive program design, and that can be for farmer organizations or for origin teams on the ground. And it really highlights how decision-making and inclusion, policies and practices, monitoring and evaluation, the makeup of field teams, how all of that can contribute or impede a more successful sustainability and supply chain program. The way that it works is that teams take the Gender Equity Index and they use it to actually design a structured gender equity development plan. The tool is freely and openly available. It now exists in 5 languages. And we invite you by going to the link below to actually go and to take a demo and see how your performance compares to others. We again use the diagnostic to inform a gender equity development plan. Each of the ecom teams that we've been working with has gone through a process to design a gender equity development plan. We have a number of other partners, including Sukafina, who's part of our call today, and dozens of farmer organizations around the world who have also used the Gender Equity Index as a foundation to guide their progress through their gender equity development plan, also guiding investment and how we communicate. How do we tell stories about the work that we're doing on the ground? The Gender Equity Learning and Innovation Network has 4 key components. These thematic sessions, these are practitioner-led, and they're anchored in real cases. We take resources from not only the practitioners that are participating in the thematic sessions, but a wide array of resources that link into the key themes that we've designed. We have discussion groups where we're really looking to foster exchange among participants. And then in October or early November, we will have an executive session, which is meant to bring together executive level, C-suite executives to really understand the broader strategy around a gender integration approach with regards to strategy, investment, and broader change in how programs are designed and delivered. We created, with input from the ecom teams and a number of other partners that we've worked with over the past several years, a 12-month learning arc. Our intention is to really sort of take where we are in the industry and move through these 4 sessions and really sort of shift the way that we understand gender equity and how to include women on the farms in particular, but also looking at the other individuals on those farms. How do we make sure that everyone is included in the way that we are laying out our programs, monitoring and evaluating our programs, and communicating about the work that's happening on the ground? So we're moving through 4 sessions. Today is the second session, putting women who farm at the center. We're building on the first session, which was all about laying the foundations and creating the conditions for success. You can find the recording of that session as well as the initial launch session on the platform, and the link is being provided in the chat. Today's session is about understanding the complexities and the diverse profiles of women on farms. We want to start by looking at gender analysis. We have several practitioners here who have been using gender analysis, and they'll explain what we mean by that and how it works, to understand the unique context within the different programs that are designed, and how then we can use the program design to maximize opportunities and minimize risk and become more effective, because these are programs that include stakeholder views from everyone, from men, women, youth in their different profiles on the farms. We want to invite you to put your questions in the Q&A part of the platform. Also, feel free to share any relevant experiences and perspectives. This is very valuable in terms of the exchange that we're seeking to foster. And then we'll have additional time for questions at the end of the session. And as you all know, you've been invited for an optional 15-minute, after we close the formal session, a 15-minute optional Q&A and discussion with those of you who can stay. With that, I will hand over to Becca Morahan, who will guide the conversation with our practitioner colleagues who've joined us today.
Thanks, Kimberly. So yeah, we just wanted to spend a few minutes kind of on understanding the context. Kimberly's already begun to explain the need for gender analysis, and what the vision and potential pathways to change are. So we've got some really great case studies to share with you that show how different companies and organizations have addressed these issues of needing to carry out gender analysis and using that to really inform their program design. So just to give an overview of our speakers, very sadly, Kakra contacted us today to say that there's issues with internet in her region. So we were going to interview her. So I'll be essentially asking the questions and answering them and hoping that I can do justice to Kakra's research. But just to introduce Kakra, she wears many hats herself. She's from a cocoa farming background. She's a smallholder farmer. She's also a researcher. She's founded an NGO in her region. Um, she's contributed to cocoa research for Mars, amongst others. So the focus of her thesis was on the heterogeneity, the variety of structures in households, in farming households. So we will look at her research and we'll just bring out the key points there around where women are present in different types of households and what that means for agricultural service provision and design of programs. We have Fernanda, rather, Soto, Joya, and Italo Sosa. So Fernanda is from the Alliance Biodiversity SIAT. She's based in Nicaragua. She's a social anthropologist, and she's worked very closely with Italo, who's part of the sustainability team in OFI Honduras, the Sustainability and Specialty Coffee Manager. And they've done really interesting work together on developing a typology of women. So really going beyond this classification of women and men to really understand women in their supply chain, and that's informed their program design. So they'll tell us about how they carried that out and what the impact of that has been. And last but not least, we have Kevin Nakitare Juma, who's the project supervisor from Kenya COF, which is part of Sikafina in Kenya. And Kevin has many years' experience of working with this kind of focus, and will talk to us about how they've carried out gender analysis and how that's informed their sustainability programming. So at this point, I would be interviewing Kakra, so I'm sorry if it's too much of my voice. But the key points we wanted Kakra to speak to, which I think we can still capture, is what we were asking her to do in a sense was to take a step back and to help us to sort of break out of certain preconceived ideas of what we mean when we talk about a cocoa farmer. Who are we envisioning? Where are women present? And who might be missing in that sort of conception of cocoa farming. And so Kakra is by no means an exhaustive list, but she highlighted a few different examples of different kinds of cocoa households. So there are women, as Kimberly spoke to, who are in male-headed households whose labor is absolutely fundamental to cocoa production. So I think particularly in the West African context, it's cocoa farming isn't something you would do as a single man. You would do it as somebody, you would marry essentially because it's such a joint enterprise and women's labor is so fundamental to it. But it's somewhat hidden structurally, and women are not accessing necessarily services directly or belonging to farmer organizations, even though their labor is so essential. There are also female-headed households, obviously, and that might they're female farm operators, but that might face some additional constraints. And Kakra highlighted, for example, older women who perhaps have inherited cocoa land from their husbands, but whose grown children have moved away. And so one of their major barriers can be not being able to have access to family labor, which is so essential for cocoa farming. And then lastly, caretaker families. So I think within Ghana, and I think in a lot of contexts where cocoa and coffee is grown, there is this dependence increasingly in some contexts on migrant labor. So in the Ghanaian system, I think a lot of us would be familiar with, some of the farm owners are absentee, so they might reside in the cities or the towns, and they would have caretaker families, families that come from poorer areas that migrate, that look after an established farm in exchange for a sort of percentage of the production. There's also sharecroppers, which is a very similar model, but perhaps is used more for sort of establishing new farms. So women are present within these groupings, and I think these farmers in particular can be really quite invisible within the system because they don't have the passbooks, for example. So this is the second question we wanted to ask Kakra, which was, why do women disappear from the data? Why are they not sort of formally visible within cocoa farming, even though they're doing so much of the valuable work of cocoa production. And so she was just highlighting, the system, as I think it is in many countries, is that farmers who are officially recognized as such, in Ghana would have what's called a passbook, which is issued by the Cocoa Board. Um, and that essentially is their passport into membership of farmer organizations, accessing services, being sort of recognized as a farmer. So women are doing this work on farm, and the sort of benefits that they gain from that very much depends on negotiation within each individual household. So some women do work for eventually having some land of their own. Sometimes it's trying to negotiate land, for their children to inherit, for example. But it's very much sort of down to each household and each family, sort of how those benefits are experienced. And the other piece that Kakra wanted to highlight was that women household heads, although one would expect them to be more visible and present in the system, can also remain invisible because they belong in greater numbers to two categories of farmers that can be somewhat invisible in the system. So one is absentee farmers, so women, for example, who are struggling to find the labour necessary to run their farm may decide to earn money elsewhere and reside in the city or the town and have a caretaker family take care of their farm. And this is particularly common. I think the average age for caretakers for absentee farmers is more sort of mid to late 60s. So it's people perhaps who don't have the strength or the sort of family labour to support them. And then landless households, which are the caretakers and sharecroppers, also that women are quite represented in quite high percentages. They're almost a quarter in terms of the research that Kakra did. So I think that shows us that, yeah, women can still be somewhat invisible, even if they're actually operating those farms themselves. And also the other finding that she highlighted was that women farm operators tend to have a smaller landholding size and tend to only be relying on cocoa. So they don't have multiple tree crops as some of the male operated farms do. So this is quite specific to the Ghanaian context. I think we've felt that there is a similar system, for example, in Colombia with the Federación, where you have your cédula, your sort of official kind of registration as a farmer. And I think even where those kind of parastatal structures don't exist, I think this kind of reality is present in many producing countries where there's a kind of official recognition of one member of the household, essentially the household head, um, and the other members remain somewhat invisible. And I think then there's this sort of complexity of, yeah, whether farmers are residing or whether it's migrant labour that's actually carrying out the work. And yeah, there's greater or lesser degrees of visibility of the people that are actually farming. Um, so what does this mean for access to services? So I think, yeah, she was just highlighting that link really, that essentially if you don't have the passbook, it's much more challenging to be sort of officially recognised as a farmer and to therefore participate in training in cooperatives, to receive inputs, credit, etc. So I think, yeah, I think this is also very true. Cooperatives membership tends to be based on land ownership or having a minimum number of trees or a minimum landholding size or productivity level, for example, which can sort of structurally exclude women. So her recommendations as a researcher were for people that are wanting to carry out gender analysis and wanting to understand the context better that they're working in, was to be quite explicit about targeting women. So to really be quite sort of purposive in your sampling. So it might not be about saying, we're going to talk to this percentage of farmers, about saying, actually, we want to go and find the women in our supply chain and we really want to speak to them. But also taking this broader view of thinking about the household. And I think I would add even the wider network. I think often it's households are not necessarily fixed. People come and go from the city to the countryside. Migrant labour comes and goes. So just getting that real understanding of the sort of network that grows cocoa and not just sort of interviewing household heads, for example. She really emphasized the importance of mixed methods research approaches. So not relying too much, for example, on household surveys that are answered by one, household head, for example, but using focus group discussions and other kinds of approaches to really understand the nuance of how women relate to cocoa. And yeah, lastly, to just broaden this definition of what we mean by cocoa farmers, really take these different scenarios into account. So yeah, so that's I hope that I've done Kakra's research justice, but yeah, we're really grateful that she was able to share that with us, and sorry that she couldn't join us in person. But yeah, so now I think we'd love to hand over to Fernanda and Italo, who are going to speak to this work that they've done, which I think will really build on Kakra's thinking as well of typologies of women in the coffee value chain. So some cross-learning here between coffee and cocoa. Um, and so I think, yeah, the essence of this presentation is that they essentially said, we need a different way of seeing women in value chains. And so they built a way of seeing them. So moving beyond the kind of existing typology to something more detailed and more nuanced. So with that, I will hand over to you, Fernanda.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
And thank you, Kimberly, and the whole team of Equal Origins and Ecom for inviting us to be in this learning uh, community and share our experience and learn from each other. Thank you very much. What we're going to do with Italo is describe a bit the ongoing collaboration that we have with OFI, the Alliance Biodiversity CIAD and OFI in Honduras with coffee. But I want to acknowledge that the development of this typology also, of this methodology also involved the collaboration of other partners. Another company in Honduras that is Volt Cafe, an NGO, Swiss Contact. And we also developed this with colleagues in India, so with tea. So it was also developed in another value chain. We started seeing that, of course, companies and other actors in the sector recognize the importance of working with women, the importance of the role they play in supply chains. But we also saw that a lot of the analysis that were done on gender were missing some women from the frame. Some women were outside the frame, and that had implications, as Kimberly mentioned, in terms of achieving the goals that were set, not only in terms of the livelihoods of women, but also on the company goals and achieving gender equality in the value chain. So we saw that we needed a different way of seeing women in value chain that allow us to, broaden the framework. And that's why, next slide, we built along with our partners a typology-based methodology for decision making. And these generally typologies in the sector are based on farm size or yields of production. And what we wanted to do was focus on social factors that shape people's experiences in the value chain. And by social factors, I mean age, place of origin, ethnicity, and territory, just to give an example of some of those social factors. So what we did, and that's why we call it intersectional. We wanted to see how they interlink and shape the experience of women and men in the value chain. We focus on women, however. And it has 4 steps, the methodology. We first understand the context and the social differences or the intersectional differences that matter for women in that value chain. And when I say that matter, were issues that shape the barriers they face, the opportunities they had, and the roles they play in the value chain. And then we grouped the patterns that we saw. We developed a typology. We went back to communities. We presented the typology. We validated with groups of women and asked them, are we on the right track? Are we missing the picture or not? And then we interviewed them further. So it entailed a lot of conversation, a lot of sitting down and listening to them and understanding their experiences, their needs and their aspirations in the value chain. And then with that information, we refined the typology and we had food for thought to work with the company. So next slide, please. This is what an intersectional typology makes visible, and this is how it helped the company, in this case, OFI, to think about actions they will carry out. So we had 5 types in the case of Honduras with OFI in 2 areas where we carry out the methodology. But I want to underline the first 2 types. Type 1 is young women from peri-urban mestizo territories, and type 2 are young women from a rural indigenous territory. And what I want to mention is that both of them are young and women, but they had very different experiences in the value chain. And therefore, what we saw was that the company often needed to have a different way of engaging with them. They needed to prioritize different actions and even identify different partners to carry out processes with them. I would let Italo talk more about how they went about that. But I wanted to emphasize that this has a lot to do with what Kakra found in Ghana. And it shows the relevance of understanding this diversity among women, even beyond women who are the producers and own land. So I pass it to Italo.
Thank you, Fernanda and Kimberly and Becca. So I want to showcase or to explain how that topology had helped us on designing proposals for projects, and also some of the interesting things that we found on the typology. For example, we found that many women are increasingly taking more leadership roles on the farms once the caregiving activities decrease on the household. So that's one unexpected thing that we found through the typology. And also some of the things that um, where we found that it may be obvious, but it is worth it to remark, is that, for example, all the constraints that women have on the supply chain, such as they have limited access to training, also to loans and finance, and to the banking system, and they are lacking basic infrastructure to carry out basic activities on the farm. And also the typology help us to start internal discussions on the team at every level, with the with the head country, with the finance manager, and also it helped us to change how we were designing our programs and our proposals for new projects, and to emphasize the importance of the supply of the women and the role that women have on the supply chain. And of course the value that we have perceived and had of the typology is that it is helping us to find more resources, partnerships, and also to explain the work that we are doing on the ground to potential partners. And yes, also additionally, I would like to highlight that at OFI we were already familiarized with segmentations. We have our own segmentations, but it's very general in terms of yield and farm size, but the typology help us to understand better what are the different roles and contexts that women has on the supply chain. Next, please. Yeah, and um, thanks to the methodology, we designed two very specific interventions. The first one was designed for, as Fernanda mentioned, um, we have we found five different typologies of women in the supply chain, and one of those were women in the peri-urban area that were increasingly being more active on the farm's duty, but they are facing with the issue that, or challenge that, there is a lack of manpower on the field. So for that, we enter in the first phase of piloting different equipment that will not only decrease the cost of production, but also decrease the amount of hours that workers pass on doing maintaining, on giving activities of maintaining the crop. Then for more youth women that has more aspirational um, mindset, um, and are looking beyond coffee, we design a diversification income program in which we not only deliver beehives but also design a whole training program in which we teach the basics of beekeeping, and also the linking. We are linking the market to the farmers, and also um, um, teaching them how to work with all the subproducts and derivatives of the beekeeping. And basically, that's an example of two very specific interventions that we have already designed for as a result of the typology of the methodology. Thank you.
Thank
I
you. Sorry.
just wanted to mention,
Yeah, please do.
really just place in the chat an upcoming event that we'll have on Thursday where I will be talking more about the methodology. And if you want to come, there's the link. You're invited to join us if you want to know more about the methodology. That's all. Thanks.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Fernanda. Yeah, thank you both. So we just, encourage any of you, if you have any questions, do put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I think we'll go straight on to Kevin, and then we'll have a pause for any questions. And yeah, that's great timing that you're able to also find out more about this. And there's also, we've included in our resource library in GENLIN 2 excellent publications, one in English and one in Spanish as well, on this approach as well, which we can send you links to. Thank you. So we'll hand over to Kevin at Kenyakov, who is going to talk to us about designing better sustainability programs using gender analysis. And I think, his core kind of message is that they've listened carefully to women and they've really integrated their input into all aspects of their program design. So I'll hand over to you, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. As you've heard, my name is Kevin Nakitare, Project Supervisor at Kenyakov. And as we see here, our main message is that, putting women who farm at the center, designing better sustainability programs through gender analysis. Next slide. Yes, the reality is that women contribute nearly every day to day coffee production, from raising seedlings to harvesting, processing and drying coffee. With this reality, it necessitates us to make sure that we think deeper and see how we can bring more women into coffee by making sure that we have a very targeted approach that not only works for women, but also works for the whole society in general. So we had to sit down with the women. But again, before we sat down with the women, what really led to this? So one of the initial meetings we had, in Kenya, farmers are organized in coffee cooperatives. And these coffee cooperatives have board of management. And each farmer has a unique identifier, which is the member number that they identify themselves as members of that cooperative. So when you put a message out there, you need a training or there's any other intervention that you want to do with the cooperative, ideally the people who are registered at the cooperative are the one who receives the message. So in one scenario, initially, we put a message out there and now we got people to attend the training. But what really shocked us is that it was almost like 5% women, like 95% were men. And one of the things I was telling them, how can we increase the participation of women in coffee? And one of the questions I was asked was that, what are you talking about? With which land or whose coffee are you talking about? So this is what necessitated to have a gender analysis. But now in terms of methodology on how we approached it, our aim was not to leave the men behind, also to listen to them. So we had individual interviews and also focused group discussion. So we had to interview the board of management, which is the leadership in those cooperatives, women separately. We interviewed men. We also put them together and now talk to them. And now through that, now we came up with a report that now made us to make decision on how we are going to proceed with designing these programs. Now, when you talk to women alone, this is what they told us. They need income to control because they are doing a lot in the farm, but they are not in control of the income. They need access to finance. They had very little chances of taking up leadership opportunities because let's say at cooperative level, they do not have let's say, the financial muscle to go against the men because it's political. They advertise the seats, you apply, then you have to campaign, for you to get the seat. They needed practical skills, to make sure that they become very valuable in coffee production, climate resilient farming, and lastly, they needed recognition for their contribution. We all need recognition for our contribution in everything that we do. But again, for women, it has been a challenge because they are always behind the scenes. Yes, so how gender analysis changed our design? We had to look at the traditional way that we've been implementing projects, but also compare that with if we go the gender responsive way, of designing the project. So in the traditional way, it's very clear. You call farmers, you train them, you go home and expect results, and expect a lot to report on. But in gender responsive project, you realize that you have to listen first. And in this case, because we are targeting women, we had to listen to women, sat down with them, design with them. The idea is not to design for women, but design with women, diversify their livelihoods, increase decision making, and also we make sure that we measure women's empowerment at the end of every implementation period. So this is what we had to target to make sure that we address the issues that women had raised. So some of the interventions that we had to include was that, yes, in some regions we had to do apiculture. Remember that I talked about the gender analysis and targeting different demographic. You need to know that maybe in this region, you can do apiculture with women. In this other region, they are comfortable with dairy goats. This other one, they are comfortable with poultry. So we had to come up with all these intervention and make sure that women fully participate in coffee and the diversification. So what changed is that after the integrated approach and now becoming very gender responsive, we've been able to train over 6,000 women. We've had very active, women pruning groups because we were able to distribute the 800 pairs of pruning tools. So as I mentioned up there, women needed practical skills. So one of the skills that we have empowered women is make sure that they are able to prune. And this has come in handy because now a lot of men now depend on their wives when it comes to pruning. We have installed 100 biodigesters. Why? Because it is important to know that as much as maybe a woman will be having a member number or they belong to a cooperative, but their capability of attending a training is not the same as for the man. So because they need to take care of other chores, at the household level, and one of them is cooking. So what do? You make sure that they spend less time in the kitchen and more time in the farm. So we've installed biodigesters for them. We financed 20 women groups to start income generating activities. And we are working with 30 women groups that we are capacity building in terms of financial literacy and other important topics that they need to be equipped in terms of knowledge. So beyond numbers, it is important always to see the overall picture of what we are achieving with our intervention. And there are three areas that we really need to target. The first one is on social. Men supporting women enterprises. This has come up to be one of the greatest achievements in gender responsive designed project. Because initially when we were calling for the meetings, like I mentioned, the men were very resistant. But now men are the one asking their women, when is the next meeting? When is the next VSLA group meeting that you're going to attend? Next is women mentoring other women groups. We've had women who are, I will call them ambassadors, who are now mentoring other women group to join VSLA, and also in terms of the practical skills that we've taught them. In terms of economic, VSLAs growing. We have VSLAs that are doing very well. One case study of having a women group that can be able to raise up to 30,000 USD on their own, some from the coffee proceeds and some from the other income generating activities. And of course, the income at household level increasing. We should not leave behind the environmental impact that women can play. With them, adopting biodigesters, they are reducing greenhouse gas emission, but at the same time, they are also generating slurry that they are using in the farm, which also promotes regenerative agriculture practices to make sure that we are taking care of our environment. And they are also very instrumental in terms of agroforestry, because we've really relied on women to raise seedlings in coffee, whether it's coffee nurseries or agroforestry trees that we have used in our agroforestry system. So what lessons have we learned so far? The first one is listen first. Don't design for women, design with women. Second, engage households. We should not go direct and engaging women without the input from the men. We include the men, yes, but now we make sure that we support the women. Diversify livelihoods. Coffee alone isn't enough. I think we've seen that in many surveys that have been done. And lastly, it is always important to track empowerment. We are tracking the leadership, we are tracking their income, their participation, and also at what level are they taking part in decision making, both at household level and also at cooperative level. We have 3 takeaways. The first one is that gender analysis is not another report. It changes project design. If it's just like another report, then it will not create the impact that is intended to. The second one is that women are not beneficiaries, they are partners. Most of the time we lose track and we keep on calling beneficiaries. No. They are partners that we need them by our side to create the change that we need in our supply chain. And lastly, when women thrive, definitely family thrive, communities and coffee at large also thrives. The message is still the same. Putting women at the center doesn't begin with a project. It begins by listening. Thank you, Becca.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks so much. I can hear those sort of commonalities between the two cases. Yeah, we've got a space for questions. I can see that we have one in the Q&A, so we could go to that one. There's a couple there, actually. Let's have a look. So it's in Spanish. It's for you, Italo. ¿Se puede tener más detalles de la experiencia del acceso al mercado compartida por Italo? ¿Dónde se ha implementado, hace cuánto y cómo ha funcionado? So this is a question about the experiences of market access that were shared by Italo. How was that implemented? Hace cuánto? So how long ago? And how did it work? Yeah, how did it work?
Yeah, so we have partnered on the field with other entity, and basically they're the ones who are like having the contacts with different groups that focus on procuring and selling at the moment honey. And yes, and also we have a very significant advantage on the region on which we decide to to carry out this intervention, because it's very near an agricultural university. So they already had it's like 5 kilometers in distance from the community, and they already have a bee processing plant. So also that's uh, an advantage. And also what we have done is that we we conform the farmers in farm field school. So there are groups of 15 and 20 farmers, and we deliver to each farmer how do you say it in English, honey extractor, yeah, sorry. And also that stimulates the working community. So also um, it had not been decided, but we are thinking on work also in some topics of associativity, on probably as an VCLA or a COOP, but that's on tax. We haven't decided yet, but basically that's how we are approaching that topic of linking, market linking. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I think we've got time probably for one more, and then we could, yeah, if anyone's able to stay on, we could respond. But I think the next one was, and Kimberly, I don't know, looking at the performance of the VSLAs, do you consider only those that are comprised of 100% women or a specific percentage of men? What are the dynamics like? Okay, I think this must be for you, Kevin. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the gender dynamics around the VSLAs. Are they made up of women and men, or only women? Or yeah.
Thank you, Becca. In terms of the composition, we have women self-help groups. So I will say there's only one group that has a gentleman. But again, we shy away from that because from my experience, we've seen that once there are 2 or 3 men in the group, it's like automatically they're being considered for leadership. So we want the women to make their own decision, to be free to discuss their own issues. One of the most important thing not to forget here, when I mentioned about the impact, I talked about social. These groups not only serve as an avenue for them to boost themselves in terms of their financial capacity, but also it works as a way of women exchanging ideas. You know, in some cases they call it like sessions whereby they can open up, you know, to other women and talk about some of the challenges that they're going through. So having a mixture again might limit women to open up and share more ideas within themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. I don't know if you've got a quick answer to this because we should probably keep going. There's a little bit more to present, but there's a question here about survival and scalability post-project. So I guess it's about how do you build in, yeah, activities continuing after a project comes to an end, and how do you scale, which is a kind of big question. But I don't know if either of you, Italo or Kevin, have something to say about that, about sort of making things sustainable and scaling them over time.
I'll jump in. So
Yeah.
for our case, the way we've designed the intervention that we're doing with the women is to make sure, of course, the sustainability part is very clear, and this is how I'll explain it. When we are supporting the women, we don't support individual women, we support the group, in that all of them are part of the greater initiative. So if you were doing, let's say, poultry as in terms of diversification with you, there is a percentage of the project that you're doing at your household level that belong to the group. So that at the end of the day, all the contribution and the success of the group, you know, is contributed by the women as a whole, but not as individuals. Because if they go individually, then they are more likely not to be sustainable and maybe, you know, the group disintegrating in the future. So we are working mostly on the cohesion of the group in terms of the intervention that we are doing with them.
Thanks, Kevin. Fernanda, did you want to add? Sorry to left you out of the
Very,
invitation. Go ahead. Yeah.
very quickly, and probably I will lead to Italo, but one interesting thing that OFI is doing is creating or working towards sort of like a business model, like a small process in thinking about labor and mechanization. So there, this program where they are providing tools for women, semi-mechanized tools for farmers, including women farmers, has a model where it can be sustained over time, but as a service provision, right, Italo?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so in a second phase, what we are designing is that to create this youth group that will provide services with semi-mechanized equipment. So as I mentioned before, it's a second phase in which what we are aiming is to reduce the cost of production and also the the lack of manpower on the field. And so we think it's a strategy that will help not only in terms of giving a better maintenance to the crop that will reflect on the productivity and the increase of yield, but also will create will help us first to identify young entrepreneurs and also to create probably a second income to this youth. So basically,
Thank you. So just to bring this session to a close, having heard the practical experiences of our speakers, we wanted to point you in the direction of some helpful tools and synthesize the approaches that you can take towards gender analysis and gender responsive program design. So firstly, I think just to step back and give a bit of an overview and a synthesis of what we've heard, there are three interrelated areas of gender analysis that we wanted to highlight today. So I think one is the fundamental practice of really understanding the gender dynamics in your supply chains. So that is about looking at women's roles, about how women and men divide labour, how they use their time, both within coffee and cocoa, but also in other activities, both income generating and non-income generating. It's looking also at who controls resources within households, how decisions are made between women and men, who owns assets such as land in particular, and coffee and cocoa trees. And then crucially, what are the underlying norms and attitudes that shape these conditions and the structures, both formal and informal, that really create these gender dynamics. And lastly, what does that mean for women and men's access to services? Currently, how far are they able to participate and access the services that they need? But based on that sort of fundamental analysis, there are two other elements that I think we've heard about today. So one is about needs assessment. I would also add aspirations and interests and motivations. So it's really listening to women and men and young people and really understanding what their priorities are and thinking about how your services and programs can respond to those. So I think that really gives rise to sort of positive opportunities and to engage women and men and to promote women's leadership. And then I think lastly, we just wanted to draw your attention to the idea of gender risk assessment. So I think part of what gender analysis does is it gives you this overview of where your programs obviously may enhance outcomes, but where they also may intentionally create risk. So I think in particular there we wanted to just keep on highlighting the importance of being aware of women's labour burden, and when we're making requests of farmers, when we're investing in sustainable agriculture, always having that view of what that impact is at a household level, who's going to be doing any additional work, what are the benefits from that. So I think if we're operating without this gender analysis, there is a risk that we might at least perpetuate gender inequality, but obviously at worst, intensify that in some way or contribute towards it. So I think that's the other aspect to keep in mind, is just how you can have this understanding and anticipate the potential impacts, both positive and negative, of your interventions. And in terms of how you go about gender analysis, we just wanted to highlight that there's an excellent resources already out there in terms of published report analyses that have taken place in cocoa and coffee. We're just highlighting a few there. And we're compiling these in the library for GENLIN, so for easy access and reference. So some of these contain also really helpful information about the methodologies that were used, as well as the results. So this is a basis that you can work from and use as your sort of starting point. And yeah, I think these field research is the second step. Having done the literature review, having understood what's already been published, you might decide as a company or organization that you want to do some field research yourselves. So it could be something that you would do in-house, that you could do with your technical team. It might be that you decide to work with a partner, whether that's a research organization or an educational institution or a consultant. And there are lots of different methods, and we're again compiling in the resource library any guidance that we find on these methods. So these might include, as Kakra was recommending, a combination, a mixed method approach, both qualitative and quantitative, including focus group discussions, perhaps community consultations, speaking in the community with women and men, either together or separately, using exercises, participatory learning and action exercises. The GALS tools, the Gender Action Learning System tools, can be really effective for sort of surfacing the hidden dynamics in conversation with women and men, individual case studies and life stories, and key informant interviews with farmers, but also with other key actors that interact with them. So these are just examples. And I think it's really important always, might sound obvious to all of us, but to be aware of the power dynamics as we go in, and to always have this view about, not contributing to those, being sensitive to those, perhaps thinking about, needing to give women a women-only space where they can speak more freely, for example, and same for men, but also that might create some resistance if one does that from the outset. So it might be important to start in a mixed space. So it's just always, thinking about the way that you do this analysis. And I think, having this view, having this intersectional lens, which I think has been mentioned a few times during our webinar, really remembering that women are not a homogenous group, as we know, and that there might be some women that find it easier to take part in these kind of meetings and exercises, and some that you really might have to make an effort to reach. And so these different categorizations here on the right, the relevance of these will depend on the context that you're working in, but it's really in terms of your sampling and who you want to speak to. It's not about having a representative cross-section necessarily. It's about saying, actually, we really need to include these particular groups. And you might need to kind of statistically oversample them within a group of farmers in order to get their perspectives. And really, thinking about geography, it's quite an important factor. Often there are farms that are more isolated or communities that are more isolated that aren't necessarily reaching services or being included in programs, but their perspectives are really valuable in terms of helping us understand, how to overcome those geographic barriers. And also crucially, thinking about movements of labour. So I think we've heard a little bit today about migrant labour, about caretaker farmers within Kakra's presentation. So I think this is key as well, that households aren't necessarily static. There can be a movement between urban and rural areas, or farmers and workers coming in and out of cocoa and coffee areas at different times in the season. So that's a really important factor to try and take into account. So that's just some overview. So we're gathering resources there, and if there's any that you're aware of that you want to suggest that we put in the library, we welcome your suggestions. I think we won't do the poll for time reasons, but just to, again, there's a lot that could be said about analysing the data and then using that to inform your programme design. And I think this key message that Kevin put across around listening to women and designing with women is we would really share those perspectives. But I think just to highlight, there's obviously a fundamental piece, which is just really understanding the roles that women and men play and being able to really shape your services around that and, broaden all of our perceptions around what the farmer is and who we're targeting potentially through programs and services. Obviously, there's a big piece of it is about understanding gender constraints. So what are the ways in which norms and roles and time use and control of resources, how do those really impact women's and men's capacity to access services and programs? And then on the basis of that, you can decide whether to take a gender responsive approach of kind of working within those constraints, working around them, being aware of them and finding ways around them, or whether you have the capacity and the ambition to work in a transformative way, which I think is always what we aim to be working towards, which is really about saying, how do we shift those underlying norms and structures that sort of create those conditions to begin with? And then I think, again, to highlight, it's important to always be thinking about risks. What are the unintended impacts of our work from a gender perspective? And also opportunities. What within the way that we're working, what are the opportunities for women's empowerment, for gender transformation? How do we really look for the existing expertise and networks that women have and factor those in as a strength in our program design? So yeah, this is just a sort of snapshot just to kind of stimulate thought of a program with and without gender analysis. I won't go through it in detail now, but I think the main message is sometimes it's not about doing new things or additional work. It can be about looking at the work that you do day to day and looking at it through this gender lens and saying, actually, what could we do differently if we did gender analysis? So just as an example at the beginning there, the sort of business as usual way is to sort of invite the registered farmers on your list of farmers who tend to be the landholders, the people who are officially recognised as farmers, and after gender analysis, you might say actually participation in our programs shouldn't be linked to land ownership. You might need to think about your communication. You might need to think about trust building, work on underlying norms and perceptions, for example, as well as the way that you issue invitations and the way that you target farmers. But yeah, just to sum up and synthesize, I think from everything that we've heard today, this is a suggested flow for anyone thinking about doing more gender analysis and thinking about how to use that to inform their program design. Excuse me. So I think, obviously the starting point would be the analysis, but starting with the literature review, field research, analysing your findings. I think it's important to share that in the teams. I think Kevin mentioned, it's been a real basis for internal dialogue between different teams. Important to share the learning internally, where appropriate, included in your staff training, and use it to define your scope and objectives as a service provider, depending on your sort of appetite for working on gender transformation, or perhaps more with a gender responsive approach, and then always keeping in mind how you can co-design and adapt your programs, your existing programs, in conversation with women and with men. And lastly, seeing this not as a one-off exercise, but as something that you will keep returning to and refining over time, and that will evolve as circumstances change and as things progress. So we'll touch on this in more detail in our next session, in session 3, how to implement the monitoring and learning and evaluation, how to develop meaningful indicators of change. So that's our suggestion for thinking about a process flow. So with that, I will hand back to Kimberly, who will give a bit more detailed guidance about how to access the resources that are available. Thanks.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Becca, and thanks to our speakers for their interventions. It really has been quite insightful and enlightening. We want to invite everyone who can stay an extra 15 minutes to please do so. We'll dig in more to the resource library and the discussion groups and answer any other questions you have. Do want to highlight in the last 2 minutes that we have the resource library, as Becca has been pointing to. We've put in already some of the resources that the panelists have spoken to about gender analysis and gender responsive program design. The link is in the chat, so you can click there and move right into the resource library. And then we also have the discussion groups, and those will be coming together with your input after the session today. We really want to invite you to become a part. The learning happens not only in these thematic sessions, but of course in dialogue. Each of you has incredibly rich experience to share from your work on the ground, how you respond to challenges, your insights and your innovations that you're developing as you are doing this challenging and nuanced work. And then we really, I think, finally just want to give a big thank you to our panelists. And again, unfortunately, Kakra couldn't join, but Becca did a great job in reflecting her research and framing the context. And it really is about how do we take the needs and aspiration of women on the farms and really use them to inform everything that we're doing in the sector, because that's where the outcomes improve. And I think each of our panelists really highlighted the tangible impacts of designing with women, listening to them, and bringing them to the center of our work in coffee and cocoa. We want you to really feel like this is a space for you as practitioners and anyone who is supporting practitioners. So we invite you to join the platform. Again, the link is in the chat. Invite colleagues to join. There are recordings for the launch session, which took place back in April, and session 1, which took place in May. We have digital digests available that give a brief summary of the key points of each session. And then we invite you, in the next slide, we have a QR code and the link, which we'll also put in the chat, to register for session 3. And so that's not until October 20th. So you have a bit of time also to share this and to invite your colleagues, and really also want to just make sure that we thank our partners, in particular SWISSCO, who is represented here by Nicoletta and Esther on the call, and also Ecom, who's been an incredible partner for this work since the early days, and again to our panelists. And Becca, thank you for walking us through the conversation, and to all of you for joining. So we'll close the official part of our session. This work is hard. You live it every day. And we want to make sure you know that this is a resource. The GenLin is a resource for you. We'll see you in session 3, and we'll close the official part. And those that can stay for the Q&A, we welcome you to do so. And again, thanks, Fernanda, Italo, Kevin, and Becca, and everyone for being here.